What's up everyone, and thank you for stopping by the channel. Today's project is this free LawnBoy mower that I found on the curb, and the problem is that the carburetor needs some serious attention. Let's take a good look at it, find out what's wrong with it, and hopefully we can fix it. In this video, we try and repair this mower. However, it may not be the exact repair you need to make to yours. We'll explore other options later in the video. In the last video on this free mower, we found out it had multiple problems ranging from loose bolts on the deck and the muffler, a missing spring on the air vane for the choke, and finally a serious carburetor problem that could potentially cause the engine to stop after a few minutes of running. That's where we left off, and we had to decide either to buy a $12 carburetor or a needle seat for less than $1. Well, the decision was made to get the needle seat as it's the most economical repair for a free mower with zero history on it. Now, to get to the seat, we need to remove the float and the needle. Once out of the way, we can see the seat located at the bottom of where the needle was. I want to try and get the seat out without destroying it, so I'll blow some compressed air into the fuel port while my finger is over the seat so it doesn't come flying out at me. With it loose, we can now safely remove the seat so we can compare it to the new one. So here's the old seat, and there doesn't seem to be anything wrong with it until you get a new seat next to it. The old one is on the right while the new one is on the left. The difference is the hole in the middle for the needle to sit in. The larger hole on the left will allow the needle to sit further down and allow the float to work like it's supposed to. Also, the smaller hole on the original one will reduce the fuel flow into the carb's bowl and will cause the engine to run out of gas after a minute of running. To install the seat, make sure the rib side faces towards the carburetor and the smooth side faces the needle. Carefully place it into the opening, and then I like to use the back end of a drill bit to push it into place. Once the new seat is in place, we can now install the needle and float to check to make sure that the float is almost parallel with the bowl's mounting surface and that it has plenty of travel to the bottom edge of the bowl nut's mounting surface. Now that I'm satisfied that it's the way it's supposed to be, I'll then use a wire to clear the hole in the fuel jet. If you don't want to use a wire, compressed air and carb cleaner will also work to clear the jet. After that, I'll use a wire brush to remove the corrosion on the gasket mating surface and then use some carb cleaner to finish cleaning the bowl. Once the bowl is clean, we can then replace the bowl and the bowl nut and then carefully tighten it as it is only brass. Then you can replace the carb back onto the engine. Unfortunately, I lost the O-ring for the intake pipe, so I'll have to replace it. I went back and watched the footage from when I took it off, and for some reason the O-ring came off with the carb, and that's how I lost it. Most of the time it'll usually stay on this pipe. If you install your carb without this O-ring, your engine might not start, and if it does start, more than likely it won't run very well. So when I removed the carburetor, I didn't remove this air vane, but I took it off this time to make installing the carb a bit easier. I still didn't order the spring just yet, but that's okay. We can still start the engine, but we'll just have to manually prime the engine with either gas or starting fluid. Now after the carb is back on the engine, we can then reinstall the recoil, the dipstick, the fuel tank, and the top cover. Now, the most likely reason for the needle seat to shrink or expand, depending on how you look at it, is prolonged exposure to ethanol and gasoline. The best way to prevent this from happening in the future is to only use 100% gas in your tank. Now, if you cannot get ethanol-free gas in your area, the other option would be to install a fuel shutoff valve in the fuel line. Then when you're almost done mowing your lawn, turn the fuel valve to the off position, then continue mowing till the engine stops. This should take around 2 to 3 minutes, so I usually turn the valve off when I have only a few passes left on the lawn. The last things we need to do before we try starting this engine for the first time is to put the blade back on, put some fresh oil into the engine, making sure we don't overfill it, and then finally adding some fresh 100% gas into the fuel tank. Then we can prime the carburetor with some starting fluid and try starting it. Well, the good news is that the engine started right up and it seems to run just okay. The bad news is that the rings must be pretty damaged from running the engine low on oil because the engine is smoking quite a bit. It's not the worst I've ever seen, but you should be able to see that I'm mowing my yard from a few houses away. To see just how bad the rings are, we can remove the spark plug and inspect it for oil or carbon buildup. And as you can see, it's not that great looking, so that might explain why the engine has a very slight ignition miss. The next thing I want to do is install my compression tester to see how worn out the rings are. These can be found online for less than $20 and will measure how much pressure your engine can make on the compression stroke. I want to see a reading well over 100 psi, and the higher the better. Anything lower than 100 will show the rings are worn out to some extent. So the reading is about 70 psi, which is very low. Now this engine might have a compression release to make pulling the rope a lot easier, so that might give us a lower than normal reading. Either way, the reading should be a lot higher than 70 psi if it was a healthy engine. That means this engine's rings are worn out, but it still has enough compression for this engine to start and run, which is good enough for me. Next, I want to try and clean the spark plug and see if we can get rid of that slight ignition miss. To clean it, I'll use a propane torch to burn off any oil and carbon. Then I'll use a wire brush to get rid of anything else that's left over. It's not perfect, but we did burn off quite a bit of stuff, so it might make the engine run a lot smoother. The only problem is with the engine burning oil due to the worn rings, the spark plug will get dirtier faster than normal. That means we might have to keep cleaning or replacing the spark plug once or twice a season. Well, I didn't hear any real difference after cleaning the spark plug, but I'm sure it didn't hurt to do it. Now, I didn't prime the engine this time because I thought it might be warm enough not to need the carb to be choked, but I was wrong. What I did was I leaned the engine back and let gravity move the air vane to the choke position, and that was enough to get this engine to start without that spring. Another reason why this mower could be running with a slight miss is the extra oil in the cylinder from the worn rings is interfering with the combustion process. Unfortunately, the only way to get this engine to run better and not smoke is to replace the rings, which is something I might consider doing later on. Now, this deck is in great shape and the self-propel system is driving the rear wheels, so in my book, this mower is worth fixing. However, an easier fix would be to find another mower with a bad deck and a broken self-propel system and just swap that engine onto this mower. So my question is, what should I do with this mower? Should I call it good and use it till it dies, or should I try and replace the rings and see just how many more seasons it'll actually last? Thank you for watching. I really appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions, and I hope to see you in the next video.